Namaste, and welcome all to our continuing series, Savitri is the Message. And as always, it is a great honor to be with our beloved Alok Pandey. We are today in the Finding of the Soul. It's Canto 5, and it's the new canto, the Finding of the Soul. There is so much here that until we get to the passage that we are looking for, I would like to read some lines to give you a feeling of how extraordinary this journey is for Savitri. The first line of the Finding of the Soul, Sri Aurobindo writes, "Onward she passed, seeking the soul's mystic cave." And then she steps into this power of night, this night of God, actually. And then we go down a little bit and we see here, this is salvation she asked not, nor a heavenly crown. Humility seemed now too proud a state. Herself was nothing. God alone was all. Yet God she knew not, but only knew He was. And then we'll continue on a little bit onto the next page, where it is so extraordinary. As might a shadow walk in a shadowy scene, a small knot passing through a mightier knot, a might of person in a bare outline, crossing a fathomless, impersonal night. Silent she moved, empty and absolute. In endless time, her soul reached a wide end. The spaceless vast became her spirit's place. And then we'll go on a little bit further. And what does she experience? Well, as if an old remembered dream come true, she recognized in her prophetic mind the imperishable luster of that sky, the tremulous sweetness of that happy air, and, covered from mind's view and life's approach, the mystic cavern in the sacred hill, and knew the dwelling of her secret soul. As if in some Elysian occult depth, truth's last retreat from thought's profaning touch, as if in a rock temple's solitude hid, God's refuge from an ignorant, worshipping world, it lay withdrawn, even from life's inner sense, receding from the entangled heart's desire. A marvelous, brooding twilight met the eyes, and a holy stillness held that voiceless space. An awful dimness wrapped the great rock doors, carved in the massive stone of matter's trance. Two golden serpents round the lintel curled, enveloping it with their pure and dreadful strength, looked out with wisdom's deep and luminous eyes. An eagle covered it with wide conquering wings, flames of self-lost immobile reverie. Doves crowded the gray musing cornices like sculptured postures of white-bosomed peace. Across the threshold sleep she entered in, and found herself amid great figures of gods, conscious in stone and living without breath, watching with fixed regard the soul of man, executive figures of the cosmic self, world symbols of immutable potency. On the walls, covered with significant shapes, looked at her the life scene of man and beast, and the high meaning of the life of gods, the power and necessity of these numberless worlds and faces of beings and stretches of world space, spoke the succinct and inexhaustible hieratic message of the climbing plains. And there's the first time we see the word message. They spoke the succinct and inexhaustible hieratic message of the climbing plains. I think we should go back and there's so much to appreciate here. Oh.
I think one of the things that used to strike me very much in this particular canto is that at first she stepped into a night of God.
Yes.
All mystic lore tells us that if you are full of the pride of the mind, you cannot enter into the deep spiritual space. And the mother, if you read through, when she speaks about the psychic education, she says the first thing to understand is that the mind cannot understand spiritual things. It's very difficult for the human mind to, because this is the prop through which we move. She says the first thing is that the mind cannot understand spiritual things. Why? Because it's a completely different domain or dimension.
And especially Savitri.
Anyway, see, this is could an ape with all the stretchings of his imagination and his life patterns, everything, ever understand a human being? Even for a human child, it's difficult because it's a different domain, different dimension altogether.
Yes.
Second thing that she says, when she says you have to search for the soul, she says you have to find that in you which is independent of the circumstances of your birth, of your education, of all the outer identities. I had a very nice, beautiful, if I may share, interaction with Aurobildo's, the chief secretary. She had come. So she said, because we were exchanging numbers, she said, I'm sorry, I am not carrying that card. I have not printed it. So I said, no, I am happy because nor have I ever printed a card. So it was a moment of, I said, because it's a false identity. These are temporary things needed for a particular purpose. But that's not what we are or who we are. So as long as the mind, we believe in the supremacy of the mind and we believe that mind can know, we are not really ready. And this is the night of God. What he does is he takes away this. In Hindi, there is a very nice term that we like God who gives, fills us, sambharta. But there is an aspect of God, sangharta, who takes away all that we cherish, all that we hold dear. And that is many times a greater grace. This is there in Tagore's poetry, it's there in mystic lore, it's there in, Draupadi's story and many other stories. That is Vani Gopi's story. That when he takes away that story of gopis and who are taking a bath, and Shri Krishna steals their clothes as the story goes, and he's sitting on the branch of the tree and playing the flute. Sri Aurobindo has immortalized this in one of his aphorisms. He says, some will see in it, one way of looking at it, but the mystic knows that this is a profound truth. And he says each brings his own mirror into the story. So he described this story so beautifully that as long as God plugged my robe of sin, I let it go.
Yes.
But when he plugged my robe of virtue, then I resisted and held it. So other day someone was telling me, it's a little conversation in Hindi, कि यहाँ जाके मतलब शर्म नहीं रहती. शर्म इज लाइक शेम. आई सेड हाँ, इतने बेशर्म बना देते हैं भगवान की शर्म का कोई स्थान नहीं रह जाता. Shame, one of the bondages, shame, guilt, all this is stripped off because you all the props we hold as our humanity, define ourselves. This being, that being, this ego, that ego is taken away. This is the night of God. And without this night of God, we are not ready. And this is the state which continues to be revealed to us. The light was quenched that helps the laboring world. Even to believe that I am helping someone, helping humanity, this all goes away because you realize you are, I am nothing, I can do nothing, and I know nothing. This is how the mother describes in prayers and meditation.
I have a personal story that I would share with Mother. And when I first met her, she, of course, talked to me a lot about music. And then she said to me, "Is the music with you now?" I said, "Yes, Mother. It's always with me." And Mother said, "Not always." And she took it away. She took it away for a number of years to work on other stuff. This is the night of God.
Yes, absolutely. That film we were talking about, Doctor Strange, when he goes and introduces himself, "I'm Doctor Strange." No, you are not Doctor Strange. You are just strange. He says, "Okay, Mr. Strange." He says, "No, you are not even Mr. Strange." You see, this all these false identities stand in the way. So the next is the light was quenched that helps the laboring world, the power that struggles and stumbles in our lives. What is that power? Mind. It struggles, stumbles. Life struggles and stumbles.
And he gives it to us in the next line.
Yes, this inefficient mind gave up its thoughts. So long as we think mind is sufficient, there is a very nice line by Guru Nanak, who is, of course, again a great mystic. So he writes, if you want to find the divine, he starts by saying, "Sadho man ka man tyago." Abandon this pride of the mind, pride of the intellect. Of course, he's not saying that start doing nonsense, dropping the mind, but he is simply saying that this pride that mind can know, this must go. Mind cannot know.
Yes.
It has its domain. It can receive knowledge and give it a form. That is the purpose of the mind. It's a form maker, but knowledge doesn't come from the mind. It is only a receiver and transmitter. But unfortunately, when it receives knowledge, it thinks, "I am the knower, I know it." That's where the problem starts. If it understands that I am receiving knowledge from elsewhere and I have to just transmit it faithfully through instruments which are perfect, there is no problem.
And you received from Ravi that thing about the quantum physicist?
Yes.
It's incredible, isn't it?
Absolutely.
He says that the brain does nothing. It's only a receiver.
Yes, it's just an instrument. That's why it's so easy to understand it. And that's why I again come back to the same thing to read Sri Aurobindo again and again. Because when we read either aloud or just by the eyes, purely neurophysiologically, the messages are going into our brain. So something is happening out there in the brain. We are busy whether we understand or not, but whether we understand or not, the capsule of light does its work.
Yes.
And that work is, the mother says, if you read Sri Aurobindo in quietude, even if you don't understand, doesn't matter, it will do its work in you and create new brain cells for the understanding if necessary. I really believe it.
Yes. She even says, don't try to understand.
Don't try to understand. So what it does is it creates. So there is a process that starts in the very brain. So the instrument has to be upgraded. The first instrument that receives the light is the brain. That's why in the process of evolution we see that. So as it begins to receive the light, it starts changing. And if that master organ changes, then all other organs can change much more readily.
Yes.
So that's what is being described. This striving heart, its unavailing hopes. Oh, this will happen, life will be so wonderful. Yes, it is wonderful, but mind cannot create it. So, unavailing hopes and wisdom, all knowledge failed, and the ideas, forms, and wisdom screened in awe her lowly head. This is the power of the soul. Small little soul. Chinna. What a power. Vamana. See, this is the story of Vamana. Vamana's story, then Hiranyakaship's story, they are like about the soul. So in Hiranyakaship's story, Narada, this is not Narada, Prahlad. He is like the soul. Nothing can slay him. It cannot be cut, cannot be burned. Poison cannot destroy him. That's how he is described. And his life is centered around one single word, which is Hari, Hari, Hari. He respects his father, but he says, but you are not God. Don't behave like one. So father says, no, how dare you speak a word like that? What I say is right. And this child says, I appreciate you, I love you, but you can't be God. And then a whole thing happens, and then at the end the soul is the victorious. Same thing with Vamana. That Vamana is a little dwarf, but he can measure the heaven and the earth and the subconscious. So this little thing, a being no bigger than the thumb of man, forgets the bliss, faces the pang and forgets the bliss. This in us is the Godhead, small and marred. Through this, she sends us her wisdom and her powers, pushes to heights and through misery's gulfs. This is the fellow, small little, angusht matra.
No larger than the thumb of man,
so that's
hidden deep in a region of the heart.
So wisdom screened in awe her lowly head. Feeling a truth too great for thought or speech, formless, ineffable, forever the same. An innocent and holy ignorance. What is that ignorance about this? When we are approaching the soul, it's not an ignorance where it's not unconsciousness. It's that state where one knows that one knows nothing. So because one is in front of that immensity. So it is a state of utter humility. So he uses the word, an innocent and holy ignorance, adored like one who worships formless God. The unseen light she could not claim, nor own. In a simple purity of emptiness. These are all high spiritual experiences or deep spiritual experiences. But there is a counterpart of all this in the lower worlds. Emptiness, nothingness, all this darkness,
Void,
ignorance, womb of,
Yes.
So, but here they are in their original sense. Her mind knelt down before the unknowable. So that's what when one kneels, this is the gesture. These gestures carry an interesting meaning. The mother says one of the gestures, when we kneel down, prostrate before the divine. In complete surrender, opening ourselves from the head to the toe. This is one of the gestures. Flinging oneself in the arms of the divine. Kneeling down. Kneeling down is what? Who kneels down? It's completely surrendered. I do not know. Whatever is your will, I'll obey it. All was abolished, save her naked self and the prostrate yearning of her surrendered heart. There was no strength in her, no pride of force. The lofty burning of desire had sunk, ashamed, a vanity of separate self. So, desire is born out of this ignorance of being a separate self. So, we want to have things and thereby recreate our universal self in ignorance. But that's not the way to create it. So, this vanity of separate self goes, and with it the desires. The hope of spiritual greatness fled. Sri Aurobindo says, first thing, why do you want the yoga? Even mother's conversation, first conversation, volume 3, 1929, first conversation, why do you want the yoga? She says, to have experiences, to help humanity, to gain powers. None of this means that you are ready for the path. Non-qualifier. Is the divine the rays of the aether of your existence? Do you want to live for the divine? That's all that is required. I will do this, I will do that. I am an instrument of God. I want to be, a great holy man. All this is a non-readiness.
And one of the things he tells us, the most dangerous thing of all, is to want spiritual greatness.
Spiritual ego, yes. Worst thing about spiritual ego is, see, unlike other egos, like in the mental ego, there is a bit of course correction. But spiritual ego, especially if you are, giving talks, so nobody will tell you, look, you are a fool. So you have to remember yourself that you are a fool. Wisdom comes from there. Yeah, it can be, I have seen, had a very interesting experience when we were just young. First time we went to a center in Patiala. And there was a man who had translated Savitri in Punjabi, and he used to come and give talks. So it was both Kavita and myself, first time we have gone there. And he was giving talks. First of all, he was not using the word Sri with Sri Aurobindo, and he says, this is like what Shankara has said, this, that. So after some time, he said, this is whatever little I had read, I thought, this is what is he talking. That too, giving a talk on essays on the Gita, just to demonstrate to what extent these things can go. And so one day, I just couldn't help it. After 2-3 talks, I said, excuse me, sir, but I don't think this is true, that Sri Aurobindo is saying the same thing as Shankaracharya. He was very angry. He said, how do you understand? You don't understand. You have to rise to my level to understand. I said, oh, all right. Now this is a non-starter in a debate. I was a youngster with rational debate. This is a non-starter. How do you debate if somebody assumes a position, sits on a pulpit? So then Kavita said, by the way, sir, please take the name of Sri Aurobindo with Sri. Wow. That was infuriating. He said, Mother used to take his name with a Sri because he was a disciple. But when you reach that level, you don't have to do all this. I said, wow. Till now it was only myself coming to his level. Now he has put himself to Sri Aurobindo's level. Now what do you speak? Then she said, no, we have faith in Sri Aurobindo. Shraddha, she used the word. He said, what do you understand by Shraddha? Then he started explaining the Sanskrit meaning of Shraddha. Then I told you, please sit now, let me take over. This is getting too messy. So I told him, left, right, center, all about Shraddha and everything. Quoting from the Gita here, there. He got so annoyed, he left the place, went away, never came. And that day it was so embarrassing for everybody at the center. They told, why did you interfere? He comes and takes classes. I said, how can you listen to this nonsense? Sri Aurobindo's picture was there, which was, everybody thought he's Rabindranath Tagore, and mother's picture is Mother Teresa. How can you listen to this nonsense? It goes on. So spiritually it is so dangerous because nobody will tell you that, look here, you are making a fool of yourself. So always have this humility that, in front of the Supreme Divine, all of us are nothing else but fool. But it is given to us that instead of being FOOL fool, you can become Hindi wala fool and be at his feet. That's the great consummation. So here, the hope of spiritual greatness fled. Salvation she asked not, nor a heavenly crown. Humility seemed now too proud a state. I am humble. Oh, you are still there. What do you mean, sir? I am humble. I still there? Humility is too proud a state. It is obvious. You are standing in front of the ocean, a drop. I am humble. What are you? Is a drop in front of that immensity. It is understood. You don't even have to say in so many words. Herself was nothing. God alone was all. This is the state to find the soul. Yet, God she knew not, but only knew He was. It is this faith that there is God. It is beyond questioning, beyond belief, beyond assumptions, beyond evidence. Everything, yes, He is there. But that's all that she knew. Now comes again the darkness, a sacred darkness brooded now within. Why? Because the source of light she is looking for. Without that, all is dark. That source of light inside. And the same sense comes here. The world was a deep darkness, great and nude. Without the divine, in that state, that holy ignorance, without the divine, the world appears meaningless. Everything is like a cinema show, it collapses without support. So it was a great darkness. This void held more than all the teeming worlds. This blank felt more than all that time has borne. This state is such, it is pregnant with infinity. It is the seed of the divine. So we can imagine, that All the possibilities, divine possibilities are here. So she is getting a sense of what it contains, holds within itself. This dark knew dumbly, immensely, the unknown. So if you were to ask somebody in this state that, what is the divine? So what will the person say? I don't know what is the divine, but I know that only He exists. That's it. Immensity. That's it.
Yes.
He alone exists. This alone. How do you know? Well, I feel it inside. It's the most intuitive sense that one has. But all was formless, voiceless, infinite, as might a shadow walk in a shadowy scene, a small knot passing through a mightier knot, a night of person in a bare outline, crossing a fathomless, impersonal night. Silent, she moved, empty and absolute. All these props are taken away, all that the mind has built, the sketches, the forms, all that collapses. Then, those wonderful lines which you read there, again, how do you know where the soul is? As if an old remembered dream come true, she recognized in a prophetic mind the imperishable luster of that sky. How do we know that we are nearing? There is the sense of that luster. It's a very interesting word. It's not that light has blazed forth. But luster is that morning, that sense that there is, you don't see the light, but you know it is there. Every day morning if you look at it, and then the tremulous sweetness of that happy air. The soul is the one which gives sweetness. That's why it draws, like the honey bees are drawn to the flower, because it is a mystic sweetness welling from the well of God. So one feels this is the real honey, the amrit, which is there as it gives that sweetness and warmth. You can actually experience it like a sweetness and warmth and a glow in the heart. This is how the soul is. And covered from mind's view and life's approach, the mystic cavern in the sacred hill. Now the sacred hill mountains are always the body. But here it's that aspiration in the body, which is pointing like a hill. In the mystic cavern, in the sacred hill, and knew the dwelling of a secret soul. As if in some Elysian occult depth. So these were, of course, the mystic, cults, Elysian mysteries. They were there in ancient Atlantis. So these Greeks, we hear about them. So they were secret cults, like our Vedic cults. So people didn't know what's happening in those cults, like the Druids in Irish. So they were sacred cults.
But that's why they had priestesses.
Yes.
And the priestesses could give them the information that they couldn't get from their mind.
Yes, that's right. So it is as if in some Elysian occult depths, truths, now these are remarkable lines, truth's last retreat from thought's profaning touch. What does thought do? Holds a glimpse, says, this is a good material for me to write a nice book. It writes a very scholarly articles on God. At one place in Synthesis of Yoga, Sri Aurobindo reminds that while intellectual understanding can be a good preparation for a powerful yoga, because mind is an instrument you need to develop. But at the same time, he says that one should not mistake the mind for spiritual things. At the end, you may realize that you have read everything that is written about God, and you yet do not know the eternal. You may have read everything, and yet do not know the eternal. Why? Because it comes through seeking. It doesn't come through reading. Reading can be a preparation. It's all right to have all this stuff if the mind can contain and doesn't get confused. But the experience comes when there is a seeking. So truth's last retreat from thought's profaning touch, as if in a rock temple's solitude hid God's refuge from an ignorant worshipping world.
Interesting, worshipping world.
Yes.
Yeah?
Why? Because now, again, many times Sri Aurobindo uses a word in many different senses, just like the root languages.
Yeah.
At another place, he would use the word worship in a very different way. For worship lifts the worshipper and makes him one with the worship. This is in Book 1, Canto 3,
Yes.
Glory and Fall of Life. But here, so one has to feel for the word. What is that God is wanting to run away from a worshipping world? Because the world worships for give me this, give me that. And Sri Aurobindo says that in number of his letters. I want this, I want that. So it worships. But its worship is not to become one with the adorer and the adored. That's not the idea. This worship is for my pound of flesh that I can extract, so God runs away. That story of Shiva I often recount, that Shiva goes to, there's a devotee who cries for Shiva. Shiva is busy in his trance and Goddess Parvati, full of love, nudges him. See, somebody is calling. It's okay. No, please, you can't do this. There's a devotee out there sitting in the hut and calling you, you don't go. Shiva smiles and says, I know you are full of compassion and love, but let's leave it. Let me be in trance. No, you can't do that. Shiva has to listen. Shiva goes. So this man is very happy that, there is a mystic who has come. He says, what can you do? What do you need? So the man says, see, I am living in such poverty. So Shiva says, okay. Puts a little finger, looks at a pot, and the pot turns into gold. So Shiva starts to turn back, and the man says, sir, just wait, sir, just hold on for a moment. Yes, sir, this cot and the pot doesn't go together. Okay, cot also becomes a cot of gold. Sir, this hut, so hut changes into gold. Shiva now starts going, is everything okay? So the man says, sir, everything is okay. You can continue with your journey, but can you leave your finger out here? This is the worshipping world. It does not love God or worships Him for the sake of God, but for one's own self. That's why it doesn't find or misses God. So, it lay withdrawn even from life's inner sense. Even there are faculties which are hidden in the subliminal being. Even from them, you cannot catch God by that. Receding from the entangled heart's desire. As long as the surface soul is active, the soul of desire, you cannot find God. So the surface soul of desire has to become quiet, quenched through life experiences, through conscious aspiration. It's a process.
And he says here the heart's desire.
Yes.
And very often the heart is misleading.
Yes. Why heart's desire? Because right in front is this desired soul, as he describes in Synthesis. Yes. Right behind is the true soul. So, that love which wells, the surface emotions, the surface love, which is very different from the deeper love, which the true heart experiences. A marvelous, brooding twilight met the eyes. What is that twilight zone? It's like, I know it and I know it not. I feel it, but I feel it not. So that state through which, she passes. And a holy stillness held that voiceless space. And then come some very significant images. An awful dimness wrapped the great rock door. So again, rocks, hills, they are all in matter. There is a door here. We don't know. So these are the doors on which the mystics ask us to concentrate. So the key is with concentration, and the doors are through one of these centers. So where are these doors? In the rocks, there is a little door which he has created. And one has to find that door. So first thing is, for that door one has to turn within. And that key works only when there is concentration of the entire being on that. Otherwise it doesn't work. That's the other part, So all the 7 or the 9 gates through which, our consciousness is flowing out has to be gathered within. That's what Sri Krishna says in the Gita, that as a turtle gathers its limbs, so one pratyahar, so one has to do that and then concentrate. Otherwise one may sit but nothing much happens. The mother says, roll your sleeves and then take a plunge into the heart, and there is a fire burning there.
Even in the West, they have this, here is the little door,
yes,
through which one can enter.
So this is the door. There are doors, 7 doors apparently. The mother has recommended, mother in Sri Aurobindo, the heart, the head and the crown, beyond the crown. The head has a problem because it can create forms and formulations of the truth. And then one can get locked into certain sectarian or cultish experiences. So, in the heart center, which is the most natural place, that's where he is hidden. While men seek him all around in all the temples, mosques, and churches, and God knows where. Even when we build a sacred space, that's what I keep saying. Like, for instance, we have the ashram here. Ashram is special, it's non replicable because it's Sri Aurobindo's taposthili. But even where you have the relic center and nice center, they are not temples. They are spaces meant to facilitate this going within process. If you treat it like a temple that you went there morning, you ritualistically did something and came out, you can do it every day. But the real thing is that, and that is required to create that space. The space is so important. It's a, special space. So there are people who are meant to create that special space. Their work, there is their life, their offering. Center has to be kept like that. Nalnida says a center is the hearth of a perfect sincerity.
Yes.
And then in that space, when we sit and concentrate, it should facilitate. But God is found here. That's where He's always present. So carved in the massive stone of matted strands, two golden serpents round the lintel curl. They are beautiful serpents. One can never feel anything hostile about them. They are evolutionary powers. Serpents always represent evolutionary power, except for maybe 10% when we see very black serpent. They are like mambas and all. If you see in dream crates, they are hostile forces. But otherwise, white serpents, even hooded snakes, cobras, king cobras, they are evolutionary energy. Iridescent serpent in Adam and Eve story. Then Shiva's serpent, you see? Shiva has put him around. It's the evolutionary power that he holds within himself. Or the Sheshnag on which Lord Vishnu is sleeping, that is also a serpent. Or the one which Lord Ganesha ties around his. So all these are evolutionary energies. It's always, that's why serpents are very swift. And in a certain sense, unpredictable. See, that's something about a serpent. You just don't know. Within moments, it just takes a leap. So it represents an evolutionary energy. So golden serpents, that power through which you can glimpse the ultimate truth. That is the soul, that window. So there they are guarding. Enveloping it with their pure and dreadful strength. Looked out with wisdom's deep and luminous eyes. You can't go inside with all the desires and this, that. Why do you want to go inside? We want to, I want to ask something material, I want absolute power. Serpent will say, you first go past me, then we will see the rest. So, to the one who is afraid and full of desires, they appear in their dreadful strength. To the one who is humble, full of faith and devotion, they give way very easily. So that's what they represent.
Yes.
What else is there? An eagle covered it with white conquering wings. So eagle is, of course, the bird of Lord Vishnu. It is power and wisdom together. So eagle is a bird which can see globally. See how the eagle actually dives into it sees front, it sees below, it sees above, it has a perfect trajectory. So eagle has that capacity. And it is the sign of an illumined mind and a divinized vital. So when the vital is pure enough and the mind is full of the flashes of light, that's what one finds there. So if one reaches this far, all these things begin to awaken in the human being. They give their powers. What else is there? Flames of self-lost, immobile reverie. Doves crowded the grey, musing cornices. So doves are symbols of peace. Peace. So peace, power, knowledge, evolutionary urge for progress, everything one finds there. I mean, if you have to put it in human language, that's what it means. They automatically awaken. If you go near the soul, the urge for progress comes. A person who is coming near the soul will never say, oh, this life. But the moment you fall, then, despair and all this starts. But you go closer to the soul, you always have that impression that there is so much more, and one wants till the last breath to do it. So these are the experiences. Gray's mother was asked about the buildings. Each of these colors carry a sense. So she was asked about why ashram buildings are generally grey and white. Now it's no more the original color, that apart. But she said, this combination brings peace.
And it's a grey-blue.
Grey-blue, that's right. This combination brings peace. So you have that description of that peace. So they are not descriptions, they are real things. But one may just experience it subjectively. It's not like everybody will suddenly, one is waiting to see the serpent. That's not how it operates. Where is the serpent? Seek the soul. Where is the eagle? It's not like that way. But they are the powers, if one goes through the subjective door, which most people go through, you will have these things automatically awakening inside. Or these beings can take other forms. Across the threshold sleeps he entered in. We touch the soul every day, but we don't know why. Because when we enter, we are given Charanamrit. So, what does that Charanamrit contains? You take it and you will forget all other things. Bekhudi ki chashni. There is one line in Hindi. There is a mystic poet who writes like this. He is referring to God. He says, "Mujhe bekhudi ki tune bhali chasni chatai." Chasni is, when you make sugar, heat it till it becomes concentrated. He says, what did you give me? I have become completely oblivious of myself. Bekhudi. I have forgotten who I was. That reminds me also of a story. Somebody went to Tagore and wanted his signature. Tagore was a mystic in his own right. So his secretary, Raja Subodh Malik, before the person wanted Tagore's signature, he said, why don't you also write something? He was also a great fellow. So Subodh Malik wrote there, know thyself. He was so happy. So he took it to Tagore, Subodh Malik. He wants your signature. Tagore saw, know thyself written there. He smiled and wrote below, forget thyself. Forget thyself. This is the problem. No, this little self is the cause of misery. To think about itself is to be miserable. That's the solution. So he says, across the threshold sleep she entered in and found herself amid great figures of God. That's when we discover we are a God who has worn a human cloak. That's how the mother describes. She says, man is himself a God, but he has forgotten. He had to learn that lesson of humility. He comes from overmind. And Sri Aurobindo in the Vedas, he says, Vedas describe that man comes from Swarlok, which is, of course, just heavens of the ideal, where if one has to see the description in Savitri. He comes from very high, that's his true domicile. But he had to go through all this, Dhobi Pashad, he had to go through this cleansing process, because otherwise he anyways feels that he is bigger than even God. So he has to learn the lesson of humility. And then she discovers herself in the company of gods. One of the things that awakens with the finding of the soul, or even as we draw near, automatically this sense of worship of the gods, the way we do it, drops away. So what do we start feeling spontaneously? Oh, my brother Ganesh. Oh, my friend. We start feeling how cute you are, but see what people are doing, this bhutnach outside your, after Ganpati Bappa, what are they doing? I pity you. And you'll get a communication, even with these sacred rivers or mountains, you develop the sense of being their companion. Because they are also working for the evolutionary labor in creation, and you are part of that. So that's how one changes the relation.
I wanted to talk a little bit about this threshold sleep.
Yes.
Because the threshold is the entry to a house without actually going into the house. You know this. In Tamil houses, we see it all the time. There's a place where they don't want you to go into the house, so they meet you at that threshold. Now, this threshold, as she enters into that sleep, she crosses it across the threshold sleep she entered in.
And found herself amid great
yes.
yes of gods.
Yes.
At one time, this since you mentioned about houses, this is how Indian houses were. I have grown up in one. So you had the threshold where you had that little, outside you are having everything. The moment you enter, first thing you will encounter, all these pictures of deities and because this is how one grew up. So the images of gods, first thing you encounter. Now it's different. Now you have a nice painting hung there or some other something. But this is how it was a way of life where a deep truth which we had forgotten was yet reproduced in the. Of course, Tamil houses are one step further. Before you enter, you have the nice columns. There's something very unique.
Yes.
I must say, it's so beautiful. And I've seen ladies stricken with poverty and with very little means, so happily they make it. It's an amazing thing to feel their joy. Just looking at their joy is so wonderful. And they'll make it so happily, that kolam, rangoli, now we hardly do it anyway, but here people still do it. It's one of the things which will strike you. It's like you're welcome as a God's royal entry. See, instead of, now we have those, outside we have red carpets. But look here, this is so beautiful, a floral design.
Yes.
After seeing it, even if you have all kinds of intentions, it will absorb because it's so beautiful. So that's the threshold. And then, of course, on the walls covered with significant shapes, looked at her the life scene of man and beast and the high meaning of the life of gods. See, this is how the ancient temples were carved. They were meant to be symbols. Konark temple, if you go, you will see every possible scene of human life displayed there. The richness of these temples. They are so amazing. Every scene of human life you will find it there. You will see the beast, you will see human closer to animal, you will see a evolved human being, you will see siddhas, you will see the image, and it's so wonderful. Even the temples here in Pondicherry, in Tamil Nadu in general, you will see those temples which are rich in detail, which is something so amazing. That yes, all this is part of that one plan. Seated within it the one, but all these are aspects of the cosmic divine. The power and necessity of these numberless worlds and faces of beings and stretches of world space. This was the way Indian temples were built. Especially in the south. And Sri Aurobindo appreciates it so much. He says they are rich in detail. So when you enter, you have these different gods. At the end you have the deity, where you finally meet the deity. But these are the powers and aspects. Why not? All the management, the round table conference, the governing, they're not barren that you go there and just sit and meditate. This was the way it was meant to be at one point. And faces of beings and stretches of world space spoke the succinct and inexhaustible hieratic message of the climbing plains. So one could, as one went through, one was receiving messages, clear messages, succinct, inexhaustible. It was not the same thing, which go through till you reach the final deity. These messages I remember at different times. We had a temple where you had to go through Hanuman. And several times I had different feel about him. One was, it was a very small space. So I felt, how could you be in such a small space? Now I understand what it means. If you really want to be as Hanuman in your bhakti and service, you have to be very vast. Mahavir Vikram Bajrangi, Atulit Bal Dhama. A small consciousness cannot have Atulit Bal. It is too small. That's why he can become vast. He can become very small. So you receive that as you go through, there is a communication that takes place. Hieratic messages, prophetic messages, messages that reveal to us some profound mystery. Messages that are like initiatory rituals. You stand before Hanuman and it is, give me the bhakti with which you have served the Lord. How happy he would be, rather than going and throwing some money and telling him that, my son has to get pass his degree and this is Tuesday, don't forget.
Yeah.
आज मंगलवार है, बालाजी का वार है. So I'll go. We think Hanuman will be happy. If he really comes to life, the first thing he'll do is with his gada. You fool, you're coming at the door of the Lord and wanting this. Especially, how the divine suffers in a human form. We look at the story of Rama and Sita and all divine. You come and you are asking for my child's this degree, that degree. If Hanuman comes alive, so that's why most of the temples, they have become quiescent. They have also got sick and tired. God's last refuge from an ignorant worshipping world. So he says, okay, I'll hide inside him. There he will not approach me with all this nonsense. So their messages one receives. Then when one stands in front, it's not like we go straight, do pranam to the Lord and come back. These are the beings who are around. In most of the temples you'll see this. In Durga Puja, you will see Saraswati and all the 4 great goddesses. This was the purpose. That these messages of God, their energies, their powers, they nourish us. They make us strong. They make us wise. So that when we go in front of the Lord, whoever is the presiding deity, here of course is the soul which is the ultimate, we are ready and prepared in that state of utter humility.
I'd like to share an experience of my wife, Mary Helen, when she had this tremendous experience of meeting Sri Aurobindo, but he was only 2 feet tall. And she wrote to Madhav Pandit, she said, why was he only 2 feet tall? And Madhav said, he's in the earth now, and he's bringing the whole earth up into the union of the divine. Powerful.
There's a whole story of Shiva with
Yes.
that where you have the secret.
Yes.
Batuk avatar. God becomes an infant
Yes.
to draw the compassion of the world mother.
Yes.
Because it's a story, just since you mentioned it, and maybe some other people may have had this experience. So the world mother, in one of her moments of intense rage, is upturning the whole world. Even the gods are trembling, shaking. Calm, mother, calm down, calm down. She doesn't listen. When she starts, it's not just the demons. Even the gods who are proud, arrogant, she's going to pull them down. So they go and plead to Shiva. He says, see, last time I tried it, what happened? She put a foot on my chest. But nobody else can appease her. So he becomes a child. And what does the child do? He cries. And the world mother, who is going in that intense divine rage, divine wrath, suddenly sees the child and turns into that image of perfect compassion and love. So Sri Aurobindo as a child is perfect compassion and love of the world mother he draws to us. Because that's the state. If he is in that mighty state, then, somebody was telling me the other day, every day in the morning I see the mother, but today I saw Sri Aurobindo. So I said, that's wonderful. No, I am very much afraid. I said, why? Said, because he's Guru. No, she is mother. I said, but Guru, why should you be afraid to start with a Guru? And he's the world mother, he's the world father, he's beyond everything, he's companion, he's friend, he's everything. So that's how the divine reduces himself to draw that, because this is the human stature and he draws that compassion. If he's in that state, he's the eternal witness and the whole world destruction can be just a transient storm. He will not blink an eye. So he has to embody this. So all this we see here. And finally, in their immensitude, shining infinity, they were the extension of the self of God. What a marvelous. See, they are aspects of God. And yet, the great gods are absolute in their own right.
Yeah.
When Brahma says, take something, Brahma is not the ultimate. And yet, the Supreme accepts it. Shining infinity. When Shiva says, Tathastu, so be it. Power of Shiva comes from the Divine Mother, Supreme Mother. But when he says, she ratifies it. So they are shining infinity because they are aspects of the one divine.
Yes.
Otherwise we think Indian, like paganism. Though paganism had such beautiful things, unfortunately destroyed, but that's a different story. Here is there are multiple gods, but there is one unity. There are 33 gods, and there is one who is above them all, from whom they have all emerged as aspects. So that is what one realizes when one draws near to the soul. With these lines we can stop.
Yes.
In their immensitude, shining infinity, they were the extension of the self of God, and housed, impassively receiving all, his figures and his small and mighty act. These gods, right up to the little detail of life, they extend. And that's how the whole occult science was, that if you have a nerve problem, so there are gods who take care of that. There are gods who quicken the passage through the nerves. There are gods who help the blood circulation. This was the original science, we've lost it. They are there in the smallest details,
Yes.
in the smallest things. And his passion and his birth and life and death and his return to immortality. So they are assistants in the cosmic theater to help man's soul climb towards the one divine. They are the ones who are meant to help. And there are beings who hinder, but they also end up helping, because ultimately love and death both conspire toward the same great end.
Yes.
Okay, namaste.
Few moments of silence.